we go. We are recording. We are good. Dan, thanks for your help, man. I appreciate it. Very much so. All right, everyone. In order for me to be able to record the classes, I do need to wear this microphone. That's the only way this works. So that's why it's not that, you know, you guys are hard of hearing or anything. It's just this is the necessary evil here. So this is going to be understanding the bump clause. And the purpose of this class is strictly to talk about the bump clause and how it works and to make sure everyone has a really good understanding as to what goes into it. Because I have noticed a few times that there have been issues with how the bump clause is used. And I want to make sure everyone has a really good understanding as to how it works. Now, the bump clause is going to appear on the first page of Addendum A. And Addendum A, the entire page is nothing but a contingency on the sale of your house in order to purchase this new one. So that's what the entire first page of Addendum A is. So if you're not writing a bump clause, you don't even need to worry about the first page of Addendum A. To fill out the Addendum A, I'm just going to go over the non-bump portion of it first, just to go over that quickly, and then we'll be spending the rest of our time talking about the Addendum A. And then I have another sheet for you that gives you a good idea as to some things you should strike in the Addendum A that'll make it much more buyer-friendly. But remember, whenever you make anything that's buyer-friendly, it's going to be seller-unfriendly. You got to try to be able to find a balance. So let's just go ahead and start. With page 1 of the Addendum A, this is just filling in the basic information about the offer that you're writing, the date and the property address that you're writing the offer on. Now, pages or lines 6 through 14 talk about if you wish to make this offer contingent upon the sale and closing. Remember, the sale and closing of another property, this is where you would strike on line 6. You strike that, then on line 7 and 8, you put the address of the property that's involved. On the end of line 8, you put the closing date. If you have a closing date on your house that you're selling in order to buy another one, you would put in the closing date there. If you do not have a closing date, just put in to be determined. Or better yet, probably put the closing date that you have in the offer that you're writing. To be determined is fine. If you want to put in so the two closing dates match, that's fine too. Probably my recommendation would be put in the to be determined if you don't have an actual accepted offer on the property that you're looking to sell. On line 9, you would list who the property is going to be, who it's listed with, or as you can see in the early part of it, buyer's property is or shall be within 7 days of acceptance of this offer listed for sale with, and then you would go ahead and fill in who is going to be listing the house. Hopefully it's you, because you're going to be listing their house, so you can help them to buy another one. It could be a listing firm in some other state, because you want to still make a contingent on the sale of my house in California for me to be able to move here. So you'd still put in the name of the listing firm, regardless of what state it's in. Or if the seller wishes, or I'm sorry, if your buyer wishes to sell their house for sale by owner, put in FSBO in there too. The purpose of this section is to fully inform the seller as to what's going on with the buyer's property. So the seller can make a decision as to what they want to do with this offer that you're presenting them. So on line, just to reiterate again, on line 9, maybe 10, you would put down who is going to be selling the property, whether it's for sale by owner, us, another firm. If the property is not currently listed, this Addendum A is saying it will be within 7 days of the acceptance of this offer. So that's another thing that you can say, that if it's currently not listed, it's going to be listed within 7 days to whoever that firm is that you put in there. And at a list price no greater than, put in what you anticipate putting in the, or you know, what you're going to list it at. So if it's a $130,000 house, you put in $130,000. There's no obligation that you have to sell it at that price. Again, this is just information for the seller to understand what kind of offer am I getting. And if you're going to make a contingent on the sale of your house, I want to know some information about that house that you're selling. So that's what section 6 through 14 talks about. Now, 15 through 27 This talks about what happens if you have an offer on your property already. So you're writing an offer on a house with your buyer. Your buyer already has an accepted offer on their property. That's when you would use lines 15 through 27. And again, this is just to let the seller know, this is, I've got an accepted offer. These are the terms of the offer. And the very first one on line 17 says, seller acknowledges that buyer has provided seller a copy of the accepted offer to purchase on buyer's property. So what you're saying is, I want to make a contingent on the sale of my house. I have an accepted offer. Here it is. And you give it to the seller. They look it over and decide if this is still something that they want to go ahead and work with you on. Because again, you're making it contingent upon the sale of the house. The seller has a right to look at that sale to make sure that it's a plausible sale. The nice thing about this is you can have all the contingencies you want. They don't all have to be met. You can literally have just gotten the accepted offer an hour ago, and then you turn around, write an offer, and then you submit the copy of that offer. So you don't have the same level of completion that the rest of this addendum is going to be asking you to complete in order to be able to make a contingent on that. This is saying, I want to make a contingent on the sale. Here's a copy of my offer. You just move on. If you don't have a copy of the offer, then you would check line 18. Buyer shall deliver to seller within 3 days of acceptance of this offer a copy of the accepted offer to purchase on buyer's property. So now what you're saying is, I do have an accepted offer, I just don't have it with me. Now you have to take an extra step to say, I don't have it with me, but when I give you the offer, it'll be written proof that all contingencies are satisfied or removed, and which has a closing date prior to the closing in this offer. So what you're saying is, I don't have the offer, I'll get it to you in 3 days, but when I get it to you in 3 days, all the contingencies are going to be removed. The other option is, which is subject to financing and blank, any other contingencies all contingencies that are still in there, and which has a closing date prior to the closing in this offer. Now, this gets back again to why are we submitting this, and you're informing the seller as to what the condition of the offer is. And if you're not able to provide the offer right away, you're going to say, I want to make a contingent. I have an accepted offer. I don't have a copy, but here now in this description on line either 21 or 23, here's an idea as to what you're going to be getting when you get it. You do that because odds are the seller is going to have to make a decision on your offer before that 3-day window is up. So now the seller is going to have a little bit more information, because you're not providing the offer. Is going to have a little bit more information about that offer before they can make a decision on the offer that you're writing. Okay? If buyer does not make timely delivery, I'm looking at lines 25 here, does not make timely delivery of the accepted offer on buyer's property that is consistent with the representations above, seller may terminate this offer by delivering a written notice of termination to the buyer prior to buyer's delivery or seller's actual receipt. You're going to have to select one of those two. If you're representing the buyer, I would take buyer's delivery. Buyer's delivery, and you can see here on line 27, buyer's delivery, if neither is stricken, of a copy of the accepted offer on buyer's property. So what this is saying is, if you don't submit that to that buyer within the time frame, within the 3 days that they reference here, the seller can terminate the offer. So you're going to want to make sure that you get that to them within the 3 days. That's the easy part of this of the bump clause. Before we get into the rest of it, does anyone have any questions? I want to maybe address these things first before we get into the real meat of how the bump clause works. Anyone? All right, sounds good. All right, now, and just a reminder to everyone that I did do a memo on this, and I sent it out to everyone via email, and I think it's also on Facebook. So please make sure you take a look at that. Everything that I'm discussing today will appear in that memo. So I just wanted to make sure everyone is aware of that. So now we get into the actual bump clause, and that is on line 28. So You want to make an offer on a property for your buyer. Your buyer wants to sell their house, but they don't have an accepted offer. That's where the bump clause comes in. So you would check line 28 and you're indicating that I want to place this offer and I want to make a contingent on the sale, but I don't have an offer on my property yet. The only two ways that you can remove that bump clause is either you can remove the offer. All right, I'm sorry, let me back up a little bit. If you place the offer, you make it bump clause, only two things can happen at this point. You will either get bumped or you'll get an accepted offer on your buyer's property. We're going to talk about first what happens if you get bumped. So you're going along, you have an offer on your property, you've written an offer for the buyer on a property, and all of a sudden the seller sends you a bump notice. It says, all right, your offer is now bumped. You will now have, per line 31, let's read that first section. If seller accepts a bona fide secondary offer, seller may give written notice to buyer of such acceptance. This offer shall be null and void, and buyer shall be deemed conclusively to have forfeited and released any interest in the property unless buyer, prior to such notice or within X number of hours of buyer's actual receipt of such notice, delivers to seller one of the following. So what that means is, if the seller gets a bona fide secondary offer, remember there can only be one primary offer at a time. So if the seller gets another offer, they can say, hey, look, I'm bumping you. You have two options. You can either remove the sale contingency of the house, and it's going to be a cash offer, or you can remove your offer altogether. So the buyer would have to either remove their offer, say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, thank you, you bumped me, I can't purchase the house, I'm removing my offer. Or the buyer can say, fine, I still want to purchase your house, I'm removing the I'm removing the sale contingency, and I'm making this a cash offer. So the way the bump clause is written, you have one of those two options, and that's it. Remove your offer or make your offer a cash offer. It cannot be contingent upon you getting financing. That's the important part that I think everyone has to understand with the bump clause. It's either one of the two. Now, with that being said, the seller can voluntarily change that if they wish. What you would be able to do, and a lot of this is going to be dependent upon what that other offer looks like, what that secondary offer looks like. So what would be the best way to describe this? Let's say, all right, you've got an offer, you've been bumped. You could come back to the seller and say, look, I can't do a cash offer, but I still want to purchase this house. I can get financing without the sale of my house. Would you be willing to still sell me the property? I will remove the contingency of the sale of the property, but I still want to finance it. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, is that okay with you? The seller could say, yes, that's fine. I have no problems with that at all. Seller could say no. They could insist upon it being a cash offer. It's going to be a voluntary decision of the seller to be able to go ahead and agree to that change. So that's the important thing that you have to remember. When you write a bump clause, I think it's important for you to explain all of this to the buyer and let them know exactly what they're getting into. And explain to them that when you get bumped, you need to be prepared to do one of two things, either withdraw your offer or make this a cash offer. They might want to ask, what if we just remove the sale of the house? And we still want to finance it. We can't make it a cash offer, but what if we just want to make it, get rid of that? We can ask the seller, but they don't have to agree to it. And quite frankly, in this market, a lot of sellers would not agree to that. They see the ability, with so many people putting in so many offers and well above asking price, odds are that secondary offer could be a higher price than what yours is, and that seller's looking for an excuse to drop your offer so they can take that secondary offer, because it's probably going to be higher priced. It might not have a contingency, might have other terms that are more favorable to them. So that I think is an important thing everyone has to keep in mind when they do this. So let's just go back to the beginning again. Once you get bumped, you have two options. You can either remove the offer or make your seller has to, or I'm sorry, your buyer has to be able to make it a cash offer, and they would need to have proof of funds. The bump clause in here, it does state you do need to have proof of funds. So if your buyer wishes to go ahead and go the cash route, my recommendation would be have them get that all lined up ahead of time, so that when they do get bumped, so when you do get bumped, you can turn around and say, here, that's fine. Thank you for the notice. My people are going to make this a cash offer. Here's the proof of funds. So then the bump clause is now automatically removed. That secondary offer remains in secondary position. So, so that's one thing that could happen with this. The other way that you would be able to remove a bump clause is if in the event you do actually get an offer on your property. But in here, if you read right here on line 36, here, actually, you know what? Let's just back up to line 32 here. I want you to look at this. And this is what I was just talking about. Written notice from the buyer that the buyer is waiving the closing of the sale of the buyer's property contingency and all financing contingencies in this offer, making this a cash offer, and written verification from a financial institution or a third party in control of the buyer's funds, buyer's funds, that buyer has sufficient funds necessary to close this transaction, which are not contingent on the sale of the property. So that's, in other words, saying, I'm going to make this a cash offer. Now, if in the event the buyer is also able to submit a copy of the offer to purchase on buyer's property, which has all contingencies other than any financing contingencies properly removed and or satisfied, and written verification from a financial institution that the buyer under said offer to purchase has been pre-approved for financing, which then will modify this closing of the sale, it just changes it from contingent upon a successful sale to contingent upon a successful closing. So that what the second section is talking about is if in the event you do get an offer on a property, how do you remove the bump clause? So that's literally the second section that we're going to be talking about is if you get an offer on the property, how do you remove it? And according to this, what this is saying is that bump clause won't be removed until you have all the contingencies other than financing contingencies properly removed. Now, if you think about it, and let's put this in a real life scenario. You have a buyer, places an offer on a property, makes it contingent on the sale of their house. They finally get an offer in. Now remember, at this point, they haven't been bumped yet. They finally get an offer in. And now, but the offer's got, financing, radon, home inspection, all the normal deadlines. You can't remove the bump clause until all of the contingencies have been met, except financing. So odds are you will get an offer on a property. You will go 2 or 3 weeks trying to take care of all the contingencies other than financing. And then, depending on, usually the home inspection is the one that takes the longest. You could go 3 weeks where you have an accepted offer on a property, but you have not been able to remove the bump clause. So that's something that you're going to have to be very careful about if you're working with a buyer and this happens to them. That buyer has to be aware of the fact that within that 3-week window or 2-week window or however long it is, they could still get bumped. Which means that it's conceivable they'll have an accepted offer on their house. They now get bumped by the seller. Let's say they can't remove the bump clause because they still have contingencies here. They could then lose that house, but now be halfway through selling their own. That is possible to happen too. So that's one thing that, yeah, Keith, I agree with you. It's like that puts a person in a very, very difficult position. Your buyer has to be aware of that's the way this contract is written, is that could happen to that person. So it's the best thing to do is to make sure people understand what's happening. But what I do have for you also is some things that some changes to this document that you could do. Now, before I get to that though, I did talk about this a little bit earlier. If at any time during this transaction, the buyer and the seller want to voluntarily change the terms of this, they can. So let's get back to the buyer has an accepted offer on their house. You as an agent could write an amendment to the seller saying that the buyer has an accepted offer on their property with all the contingencies remain. Seller agrees to remove bump clause. You sign it, the buyer signs it, you send it over to the seller looks at that, the seller could say, you know what, I'm okay with this. I know that's not what the offer says, but the fact that they have an accepted offer on their house, I will drop the bump clause now and not wait for all those other things to be done first. Buyer and seller can voluntarily do just about anything they want. If you do get bumped, you could come back with an amendment that says, buyer agrees to remove the sale of the home contingency, but will still be financing the property. Seller could look at that and go, you know what, I'm okay with that. It's not what the offer says, but I'm all right with that. I'm going to agree to that. And they could sign it and then move on. That secondary offer would then remain in secondary position. So there are options that are available to you, but the important thing is make sure the buyer understands exactly how the offer is written and what could and could not happen. That I think is the important thing. Now, let me talk a little bit more about how the bump is actually done. And in here, now I'm going to go back up to line 31. If seller accepts a bona fide secondary offer, seller may give written notice to buyer of such. This offer shall be null and void, and buyer shall be deemed conclusively to have forfeited and released any interest in the property unless buyer, prior to such notice or within blank hours of buyer's actual receipt. This is one of the few places where they do actually talk about buyer's actual receipt. So, and you notice they talk about hours. It is down to the minute as to how long this bump clause lasts. Normally, you would put in 72 hours, 48 hours. I've seen 24 hours. I've seen 0 hours. What that means is the buyer has to be given actual receipt of the fact that they're being bumped. Actual receipt is different than delivery. Delivery is you go back to your offer, you see all the different delivery options that are in there, whether it be personal delivery, personal representative. Email is generally the most accepted one. So if you go ahead and submit a bump or anything, you just send it to the email address. It's considered delivered when you hit send. That's when the time frame starts, when you hit send. Actual receipt means it's been sent to the other agent. The other agent sends it to the buyer, and then the buyer actually looks at it. When the buyer actually looks at it, that's actual delivery. That is a very important part of this because it's conceivable that there could be 24 hours from when a bump clause or a bump notice was sent until the buyer actually sees it. And then the amount of time that 48 hours or whatever is agreed to in the offer, that's when the clock starts. Email's a good way to do this because you can actually, now down to the minute as to when all of this happened. Also, on notices, there is an additional line. It was a notice that there's a recent change to the notices that give a time and date as to when buyer did actually have actual receipt. So you're actually able to document on there the buyer initialing, yes, I've received it at this time. They click, just like an electronic signature, they click, yes, I've received it, the clock will start now. That's an important part of this. Now, what I've seen a lot of people do is when they represent the seller, let's say they get an offer in that has the home sale contingency, and they say 48 hours of buyer's actual receipt. The counter offer will come back and say it'll be within 48 hours of delivery. That's what a seller's agent would probably do, because you can't, it can sometimes be difficult to confirm actual receipt and when that happened, and shenanigans do happen. You know, if a buyer finds out, I might get bumped, I'm going to the cabin for the weekend. You know, and then it's 3 days before they see it, and then the bump clause starts. That could happen. That has happened. So you're going to want to be careful of that. When I was selling and I would be writing a secondary offer and I know the person was going to be bumped, I loved submitting that offer on Friday night, because I know that when the bump clause started, maybe Friday night or Saturday morning, I'm going to spend 48 hours. 40 of them is going to be the weekend where no one's going to be able to do anything. So it's, you know, there's little strategies, and yes, I can be a little stinker every now and then, but it's, you have to be careful about how that's going to work. So as a buyer, you just need to be aware of that. As a seller, you also need to be aware of how that that whole thing works too. Now, the other thing that I wanted to go over with you, let me just check my notes here, make sure I got everything. All right, I just want to go down here to the lines 48 through 52. And here it says, other than the deadlines for the buyer financing pre-approval letter, if applicable, payment of earnest money and blank, all deadlines in this offer, which run from acceptance, shall run from the time buyer has complied with requirements 1 or 2 above. In other words, when the bump clause was removed. That's when all the deadlines will start, with the exception of earnest money and financing pre-approval. Those things, once you put in the offer, and you know, in the offer it says you'll have like 7 days to provide financing pre-approval. That you have to do from the acceptance of the offer, not when the bump is removed, but the acceptance from the offer. Same thing with the earnest money. That's supposed to be paid up front. Even though it's in a bump, it's a bumpable offer, you still pay the earnest money up front. At least the way the offer is written, that's the way you do it. You can strike these things if you want. I often strike earnest money. Pre-approval, they should be pre-approved for it in the first place before you're writing an offer, so I'm not too worried about that. But what I will do is strike payment of earnest money. And I'll be able to show you, I have another screen where I have some markups that I want to show you. So before I go to the markup screen, I know I've kind of thrown a lot of things at you, and I hope you guys take the time to read that memo that I wrote, because it does spell things out pretty well as to how this works too. Do you guys have any questions as to the bump clause and the way this is written? Okay. Oh, go ahead. Oh, right, right. Yes. Oh, and what? Sure. What I would probably do here is strike buyer's actual receipt. Okay. Okay. And the actual receipt is still in there. Right. So once you, well, at that point, then you're at the mercy of the offer, the way it was written. So yeah, it's going to be difficult to do that. Now, understand that as an agent working with the buyer, it's your responsibility to get things to that buyer as quickly as possible. You still have that obligation as an agent to do that. So you need to get that over to them quickly. That's not a guarantee that it'll happen, because we don't know what this disposition of the buyer is. This is one of the times when it's really good to be using dot-loop, because dot-loop tracks every single little thing that happens. It tracks when you send it over to someone, especially if you're working with the buyer. You're able to really document exactly when the buyer looked at it. So you'll be able to show when it was sent to the buyer. And it will show buyer opened this email at this date and time. So now you have a very accurate timestamp as to when the buyer did look at that particular document. Okay. If you're a listing agent and you get an offer in like this, I would definitely strike the words blank hours of buyer's actual receipt, and probably in the additional provisions just put in bump clause will be in will use delivery instead of actual receipt. Just making a statement in there that it's going to be delivery and not actual receipt, because those are two different things. And we need to make it very clear as to when it's going to start. I've seen notices for bump clauses where it says at 9:48 a.m. You're officially the bump clause has officially, or I'm officially notifying you at 9:48 a.m. that we've received a secondary offer and the clock starts now, or something like that. The time frame starts now. So it makes it very, very clear in that notice as to when everything is going to start. One of the things that you're going to want to do when you're working with a buyer is to talk about how long of a window are you going to, do you want for the bump clause? Do I want 72 hours, which is ideal? It gives the buyer plenty of, lots of time to do something if they need to. The seller might say, look, it's, no, 24 hours, that's all I'm going to do. It's a negotiation point. And it's something where the buyer and seller are just going to have to come to an agreement as to how long is that bump clause going to be. I've seen bump clauses where it has 0 put in. That's a clear signal that, you know what, unless I sell my house and I get everything done, I can't buy it. So let's not just fool around. 0 hours, if I get a notice that you received a secondary offer, you might as well send me a cancellation of mutual release, because there's no way I can purchase this house unless I sell mine. It makes it very clear as to how that's going to work. The seller could put that in. I wanted the 0 hour. Either you're going to be able to buy it or not. And really, what difference is the 48 hours going to make? It's all something to be negotiated. Sharon, did you have any other questions? Okay. Yep, I'm getting to that next. So, anyone else? Any other questions? Okay. All right, so what I'm going to do is show you the same addendum A, and it's my intention to have these documents uploaded with the program, with the class online. So you'll be able to take a look at what changes I've made. So these are the changes that I'm suggesting that you can make to make this much more buyer friendly. Remember, the seller doesn't have to agree to this. But this is something that if you want to make it more beneficial to your buyer, these are some corrections that you would make. So in the first one, I strike on lines 32 and 33, I strike the word "and all" right here, and financing contingencies in this offer, making this a cash offer. So what the way this reads is, let's see, written notice from the buyer that the buyer is waiving the closing of the sale of the buyer's property contingency. So I'm waiving the sale of that. And written verification of financial institution or a third party in control of buyer's funds, that buyer has sufficient funds necessary to close this transaction, which are not contingent on the sale of the buyer's property. Funds is not the same thing as cash. If you have a buyer who is literally like pre-approved for the loan, they just need to go ahead and they've maybe done the appraisal already and everything is taken care of. The bank says, here, I'm giving you this money, here are your funds. That would work. Again, I have to say that the seller doesn't necessarily have to agree to this, but that's something that you would be able to put out there and say, look, once I get it, if I get bumped and I can show I can get financing for it without an issue, will you still sell it to me anyway? The seller might say yes to that. Now, what this is really doing is emulating what I talked about earlier, where you'd be able to write an amendment asking the seller to voluntarily change the terms of the offer to something like, I got an accepted offer. Is it okay if I go ahead and we drop the bump clause now because I have an accepted offer. Granted, I haven't met all the other terms, but is it okay? You're just putting that in the offer right away, that you're asking the seller to agree to that. So that's what that first section does. Now on line 2, lines 36 and 37, this has to do with the second way you can remove the bump clause. You get a copy of an offer to purchase on buyer's property. So you get a copy of the offer and written verification from a financial institution that the buyer under said offer to purchase has been pre-approved for financing, which then will modify this closing of the sale of buyer's property contingency, making this offer subject to a successful closing. So what we're saying here is you, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, will voluntarily drop the bump clause if I'm able to produce an offer with all the other contingencies. Again, this emulates the voluntary amendment that I talked about earlier. You're just now putting it in writing in the offer and asking the seller to agree to that ahead of time. Now down here, we also talk about, I had talked about this payment of earnest money, where we can strike that. And we talk about here, other than deadlines for buyer financing pre-approval letter, if applicable, and you just leave this blank, all deadlines in this offer which run from acceptance shall run from the time buyer has complied with the requirement 1 above. So what we're saying here is we're not going to pay the earnest money until we remove the bump clause. Now, there's one other little thing that I think is terribly important for everyone to understand in regards to the bump clause, and that is section, the next line down here. If in the event you've written the offer, you have the bump clause, your buyer now sells their house, gets an accepted offer, and then you go back and notify the seller, hey, I've got an accepted offer here. The deadline in that scenario does not start when you notify the seller you have an accepted offer. It starts when you have an accepted offer on your buyer's property. There could be a day or two difference. Let's say you get an accepted offer on Saturday, and on Monday you write the notice to the seller that says, hey, I got an accepted offer, you need to remove the bump clause. All the deadlines start when you got that accepted offer on the buyer on that Saturday. They don't start on that Monday. And that's here on number 2. Or from the time buyer has an accepted offer on the purchase of the buyer's property that complies with requirement 2 above. Requirement 2 is a copy of the offer to purchase. So you have to be careful when your deadlines start, because you could be off a day or two, which means you could be missing contingency dates. So you have to understand exactly when does that deadline start when you do get an offer on your property. It's when the buyer agrees to an accepted offer on their house. That's when their deadlines start for the house that they're buying, not when they notify the seller, I've got an accepted offer. Okay, that's pretty much all of page 1 of the addendum A, which covers the bump clause. I've thrown a lot of things at you. Do you guys have any questions, anything at all that you have any sort of, you need something clarified a little bit more, or a little bit more of an explanation or something? Okay, this is the hardest part, and no one's asking me questions but Sharon. Come on, this is agency, the way multiple representation works, and the bump clause. These are definitely the hardest things in an offer. If you can master these 2 things, the whole rest of the offer to purchase and listing contract, those are going to be easy. These are definitely the most difficult parts. So to just kind of recap, if you write an offer and it has a bump, you have 2 options when you get bumped. You can either remove your offer or make it a cash offer. That's the way this is written. So you have to make sure your buyer understands it's going to be one of those 2 things. If you get an offer on your property, you can't remove the bump clause right away, because in here it states all the contingencies have to be removed except for financing. So there could be a 3-week window where the buyer has an accepted offer on their house, but they can't remove the bump clause So it's in that buyer's best interest to get all those contingencies wrapped up as quickly as possible. You can always voluntarily or always ask the seller to voluntarily change the terms. That's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. No, it would have to be written. An amendment, because you're changing the terms of the offer, so it'd have to be an amendment. So let's say you get an accepted offer, but you have all those contingencies. You could then at that point say, just give them an amendment saying, buyer has an accepted offer on their property, seller agrees to remove the bump clause. It's not the way it was originally written, but it's a change in the terms, and the seller could agree to it. There's nothing wrong with trying. I would definitely try. Let's get that bump clause removed as quickly as possible, because you do have that 2-3 week window where Lord only knows what's going to happen. All right. Yes. 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 The RANW has an addendum to the WB41 notice, and it has a lot of the pre-printed language in there, notifying that buyer has an accepted offer with all contingencies removed. You could use that notice too, but remember, if you use the RANW addendum to the notice, you have to use both forms. You have to use the notice, and at the bottom of the notice form, it shows where you have an attachment, and that's where you'd write in the RANW WB41 addendum to notice, and then you would supply a copy of that. And on the 41, it's all check boxes. You don't have to write anything. You just select whatever one it is. And it's a nice utilitarian form. It can be satisfaction of a home inspection contingency, satisfaction of financing, well, not financing, maybe appraisal, a number of other things that unsatisfactory home inspection. It's got a lot of different things in there that you could use it for. What I would recommend is you can either use the two forms in conjunction, or just take the wording off of one and just type it on the take the wording off of the RANW addendum and put it in the regular notice. You could do that too, but you do have the option to use that if you'd like. It is in there. Okay, good. No worries. I'll be around this weekend, so don't worry about that. Anyone else have any other questions? All right. If at any time you guys do have a question, please don't be afraid to call and check in with me. I'd be happy to answer them any way I can. I'll be around this weekend, so if you guys are busy, give me a call. No worries, I'll be in town. All right, everyone, thank you for attending. I appreciate it.